Yo, welcome back, boxing fans. Hajime no Ippo is a shonen manga with a surprising amount of depth, and is one of my favorite stories of all time. This video is the first in a series where I'm going to sequentially review every arc of the story with a focus on literary analysis as we go. This video will discuss the plot events of the series, and where it makes sense, I will be mentioning future events. As a result, if you want to experience the story brand new, I suggest that you start there and then return to this video. Other than that, we're good to jump in with the first arc of the series, the Early Days arc. Our story starts with an introduction to high school student Ippo Makinauchi, as he is getting invited to join some classmates after school. Ippo seems to be over the moon with the invitation, which is our first look into his personality, showing that he's a shy but earnest and eager teenager. Unfortunately, Ippo remembers that he has to help his mom at work in the evening at the family-run fishing boat, an obligation that keeps him from socializing more often with his peers, leading them to ostracize him. Things go from bad to worse for Ippo, as we meet another main character during his walk home from school bully Masahiko Umezawa, who accuses Ippo of stinking like worms, a dig at his family's business. Umezawa and the other bullies turn violent, pinning Ippo against the wall and beating the shit out of him. It's important to note, though, that Ippo still doesn't really rise to their provocations. He can endure insults and he can endure physical pain, but his face changes when his mother is first insulted. Ippo glares back at Umezawa, showing the extent to which he cherishes his mom. He's willing to fight back if it's her honor at stake. Unfortunately, though, he ends up chickening out and gets kicked by the bully, luckily landing in the hands of a pro boxer doing his road work nearby at the same time. The boxer's name is Mamoru Takamura, and he is another one of the main characters of the series. Takamura dances through the bullies, grabbing the buttons off their uniforms with deft and imperceptible hand speed. This causes the bullies to run away, clearly outmatched, while Takamura goes to console Ippo. Ippo stares in awe at what Takamura just did, setting into motion their long and brother-like relationship. He then passes out, which pisses off Takamura, another example of Morikawa's early strength, showing us this kind of condensed characterization. In only a handful of pages, we've now been introduced to three of the main characters, and we've already gotten a good feel for what they're like. Ippo goes on to wake up in a boxing gym, having been brought there by Takamura while he was unconscious. I really love this page of early characterization by Morikawa. Takamura starts the series by sort of not actually liking Ippo. He thinks he's a coward for not fighting back. The neat part, though, as the series evolves, is that neither Takamura nor Ippo's outlook is really favored in the end. They're really just different ways of looking at strength. Ultimately, Takamura sets up a drawing of Umezawa and places it on a bag for Ippo to hit. He does so, inadvertently revealing an incredible amount of lower body strength and an ideal punching form, shocking the gym. We get a really gnarly panel a few pages later where Ippo's fist is completely torn apart, the strength of his punch turning back on him, damaging his own body. This is the first visual metaphor for a very major theme in the series, the self-destructive nature of boxing, particularly Ippo's boxing. As we go on, we're going to see how Ippo's boxing style represents a double-edged sword and has the potential to hurt him as much as it does his own opponents. Takamura ends up telling Ippo about Mike Tyson, ending the story with a focus on how Mike completely changed in terms of behavior throughout his boxing career. This leaves a lasting impression on Ippo, one that sets into motion his story. In the end, Ippo borrows some VHS tapes from Takamura and he returns home. We're then introduced to Ippo's mom, Hiroko Makinauchi, who I'll probably be referring to as Mama Makinauchi through the rest of these videos. She recognizes that Ippo's been taking a beating at school, and she even recognizes her own role in it, but Ippo ends up deflecting the conversation. Again, I kind of have to marvel at how well all of this characterization is packed in, because here we start to see some of Ippo's character flaws as he's incapable of standing up for himself and also for asking help. In another brilliant page, Morikawa sets up a really clear metaphor that goes a long way towards showing us exactly who Ippo is. Ippo tells all of the fishermen at the boat that he'll carry their supplies, and he does so, showing us his deceptively strong body. What Morikawa is doing here isn't as simple as showing that Ippo is strong, though. He's also showing us how Ippo is self-sacrificial, and tends to take on other people's burdens, lifting them himself. Later that night, Ippo returns home to watch the Tyson tapes. Marveling at the heavyweight champion, Ippo fixates on the story that Takamura told him about Tyson changing himself. During this scene, we get some of the most important words of the entire series for the first time, as Ippo asks himself, how does it feel to be strong? A question which will define his life from this point forward. The next morning, Ippo manages to track down Takamura during his road work, and confesses to him that he wants to try out boxing. Originally, Takamura assumes that Ippo means recreationally, and encourages him to do so, before Ippo goes on to admit that he means professionally. Takamura gets genuinely mad at this, grabbing Ippo by the collar and telling him that the ease of which Ippo is saying this bothers him. Again, this is Morikawa setting up a very major theme for the entire story in just a few of the early panels. Takamura's career is essentially defined by his commitment. The commitment to fight regardless of the consequences. Here, he's directly warning Ippo that this isn't a world to enter haphazardly. However, Ippo also shows us another important side of himself here, as he asks Takamura the burning question, how does it feel to be strong? While sometimes Ippo can lack clarity of purpose, here his desire is extremely clear. Takamura, inspired by Ippo, goes on to kick a tree and catch a handful of the falling leaves with alternating right and left jabs. He goes on to challenge Ippo to replicate this, telling him to catch 10 leaves within a week if he wants to be a pro boxer. It's important to note that Takamura, contrary to his nature, isn't actually being a dickhead here. He senses a softness in Ippo, one that's undeniably there, and he thinks that such a softness can't be part of a successful boxing professional. As Ippo gets to practicing, he actually ends up forgetting about helping his mom for the morning fishing. Once more, we're set up with this early tension between boxing and the fishing business, something which will come to be a major part of the series as it goes on. I do really love this little bit of characterization for Mama Makanauchi though, as she flat out tells Ippo to follow his passions. She is genuinely always so supportive of him. What a great character. While his training started decently, Ippo hit a brick wall after the first few leaves, until he has his first moment of boxing revelation. Ippo remembers back to Takamura's demonstration, realizing that he needs to relax his hand to perform a snapping jab. On the day of the promise, Takamura, who forgot about it, arrives to find a clearly exhausted Ippo. He tells him that he only has one left in him, having practiced all night until Takamura got there. We get a really good look at Ippo's obsessive nature here. When he wants to do something, usually boxing related, he'll whittle himself to the bone to do so. Ippo demonstrates his jab to Takamura, successfully catching 10 leaves and giving us the series' first big I did it moment. And Takamura, for his part, is pretty proud of Ippo, noting that he had intended for him to do it with two hands, but Ippo managed to do it only with his left. Much later in the series, we get another of Ippo's gym mates talking about this training, saying that they couldn't do it, even though they were a professional. In a sense, this is one of the first big hints that Ippo is massively talented. The two take off to the gym as Takamura yells at Ippo to leave him alone, the end of a long chapter 1 and the start of a long friendship between them. As chapter 2 starts, Takamura takes Ippo to the gym to meet everybody, introducing him as a new member. Here, we meet the chief trainer, Coach Genji Kamigawa, another main character the gym is named after. The coach doesn't see a lot in Ippo initially, which Takamura rebuffs, saying that they should at least try him out. To quell Kamigawa's concerns, Takamura volunteers Ippo for sparring, and gets him in gear while Ippo chants to himself about his dreams of professionalism in order to face the scary situation. It's here that we get introduced to yet another main character, 16-year-old Ichiro Miyata, a talented pre-professional boxer who will go on to be one of Ippo's main rivals and core motivations for boxing. Miyata is, in some sense, the opposite of Ippo. Takamura tells Ippo that he's strong, well above the level of some 4-round boxers, the earliest stage of a Japanese professional's career. Ippo notices that they're the same age as the spar starts, but their paths to this ring couldn't have been more different. Takamura gives Ippo a strategy, one that's going to come up every so often from this point forward, Operation Turtle. Like it sounds, Ippo is told to just harden his guard and survive, a strategy that clearly doesn't give him a ton of confidence as the spar starts and Miyata strolls forward. Predictably, Miyata ends up landing a heavy left on rookie Ippo, who collapses to the floor, but as he does, he actually comments back to Miyata about the strategy he used, the high-low combination, showing that his observation skills are developing. The fight resumes and Miyata scores another down, meaning one more will be the end of the spar, but Ippo is surely not prepared to let it end there. And, although it might not be pretty, Ippo does manage to hang on for the rest of round 1, running around the ring as best he could while covering his head so he couldn't get knocked out. The round and the chapter end to Miyata's bewilderment and embarrassment. Chapter 3 starts where the last one ended, and both fighters return to their corner. Obviously in a pretty different physical condition. We get a neat little moment here where we see that Miyata and Takamura clearly have a pre-existing relationship, as Miyata knows that Takamura is likely to suggest an offensive strategy. We get a really lovely panel partway through this chapter after Takamura notices how chatty Ippo is being, even in the midst of a spar. Ippo tells Takamura that the pain is simply different. He can handle being punched by Miyata because they're doing it in a competition, whereas Umezawa's bullying hurt too much emotionally. Ippo says that he can withstand anything so long as it's like this. Takamura then reminds Ippo that he's already learned the jab, and he reminds him about the leaves as well. We get Ippo's first fighting stance here, which is a neat little touch, and then the spar resumes. Ippo's jab comes out, and it surprises everyone watching, with Miyata Sr., who's also Miyata's coach, wondering if he's really a rookie. While Ippo struggles to connect the jabs, the sheer volume of them shocks Miyata, who wonders if Ippo has limitless stamina. Miyata starts to get a little startled here, overwhelmed with Ippo's pressure. Ultimately, Chapter 3 ends with Ippo having blown away Miyata's guard, sending a second right to his rival who's on the ropes. Unfortunately for him, though, Miyata manages to dodge before the round ends. The third round starts with Miyata locked in, as he manages to land a number of punches on the rushing Ippo before nailing him with a critical strike to the jaw. Of course, Ippo manages to get up and he starts up his offense again, annoying Miyata, who grows in frustration at his inability to keep Ippo down. We see that Ippo is refusing to fall because he understands that his dream is on the line. Again, this is brilliant and direct characterization from Morikawa. In this series, your dreams are just as important as your skills, and Ippo has a huge one that he's not prepared to lose now. Ultimately, the fight concludes with something just as important as Ippo's dreams of feeling strong. A massive right counter from Miyata. Miyata, as we'll come to find, is obsessed with counters, and they represent his dream as much as anything else. Impressed from the spar, Kamigawa tells Takamura that Ippo is in. He's to come daily, and he's going to become a professional. We get a nice little bit of character writing for Miyata here too, as he tells his father that Ippo's presence is going to make boxing more interesting. When I first read the series, I was actually initially concerned that Miyata would be an edgy rival, but he actually has a ton of respect for Ippo, which makes their interactions a lot more interesting for me. The chapter winds down with Ippo greeting his other gym mates, happy to have taken the first step in his dream. As Chapter 5 starts, Ippo's mom thinks that her son reminded her of his father when he was talking about wanting to box. Ippo's dad will go on to be an important motivation for Ippo, an ideal that he strives to live up to. We get a really funny page as Ippo is making his way to the gym for the first time alone. He thinks to himself that Kamigawa is scary, something he'll definitely not think later, but he almost gives the old man a heart attack when he comes in screaming hello. During his training montage, Ippo remarks to the coach that he wouldn't actually be able to hit Miyata, saying that he would dodge all of the punches. The coach then proposes to put the question to the test, arranging another spar in 3 months, giving Ippo the time to learn some basics. As the chapter starts to end, Ippo's being taught the uppercut, a punch that he's very inclined toward and one that will go on to be a major part of his arsenal during the rest of his professional career. Ultimately, Takamura takes notice of Kamigawa's intentions. He's deliberately stoking the rivalry between Miyata and Ippo in order to try to realize both of their immense talents, and it's working. They can't wait until they meet in the ring again. Chapter 6 starts with a pretty funny introduction to another main character, as Miyata knocks Masaru Aoki out of the ring during training. Aoki is an extremely important character in Hajime no Ippo, but he won't really show why for a while yet. As Kamigawa is busy for the day, he ends up telling Ippo to practice some shadow boxing. After thinking up Miyata as an opponent, we get treated to some hilarious panels as Takamura watches Ippo get beaten up by his own imagination. Miyata psychs himself up too, as he's clearly training hard to beat Ippo, remarking that he won't let the difference between them close up during the 3 months. Ippo's observation and training continue while we get one of the funniest jokes in the entire series, as Ippo does this dumb little sideways hop thing as he tries to copy Miyata. Remember this, as it's going to come up a bunch and I'm going to mention it every single time. Despite his awkwardness, Ippo's training bears fruit, again showing us that he has a natural talent when it comes to boxing. He manages to fully conceptualize Miyata's shadow, having watched him closely enough over time to pick up his movements and habits. Kamigawa is clearly impressed with Ippo's efforts, noticing how quickly Ippo has accomplished this as the chapter ends. Oh, and Ippo does the stupid little jump thing again. Chapter 7 begins with Coach Kamigawa teaching Ippo some footwork, namely lateral movement. He ends up noticing that Ippo's shoes have worn down and tells him that he should go get some boxing shoes. Here, Ippo's naivety is put to the test as the sports store employee tries to sell him some overpriced options, but Miyata happens to be nearby and he steps in to help. Ippo buys Miyata a drink as a thank you, suggesting that they chat while they enjoy them. We get to see the budding bromance as Ippo wears Miyata down with his earnest and sincere questions about boxing. Miyata is easily baited into talking more about his style of boxing, despite earlier saying to Ippo that he wasn't going to share any hidden information. It's here where we get the most important part of Miyata's backstory, so pay attention. This is a backstory that's going to be revisited multiple times over the course of the story, and Miyata's motivations are mainly about what he talks about in this part. He tells Ippo about his fascination with his father's former boxing career and the counters that he used, before then telling Ippo about how his jaw was shattered in an OPBF title match. Miyata has clear trauma over what happened here, as his father was both physically and mentally destroyed by the fight. While still a child, Ichiro vows that he'll take up his dad's mantle and prove his boxing style effective against the world, a fact made all the more ironic by his inheritance of his father's greatest strengths and weaknesses. It's here where we get Miyata claiming that a counterpunch is his reason for being a boxer, and as the story goes, we'll see just how obsessed he is with the idea. Throughout the course of the series, a number of fighters tie their entire self-worth into boxing, but Miyata is really the only one that ties it all into one specific punch, showing us right off the bat how intense and serious he is. Upon returning to practice, Chapter 7 winds down with Ippo telling Kamigawa that he wants to take Miyata's counter head-on, a very emblematic declaration as Ippo as a character is defined by stepping forward. Chapter 8 gives us Kamigawa's answer to the counter dilemma with an incredibly controversial strategy, asking Ippo to work on his dashing ability in order to intercept the punch with his forehead. This is a tactical decision that's pretty in character for Kamigawa, as it shows us his early distrust of Ippo's intelligence, which is a theme that I think is hit a lot more as the series goes on. This rudimentary strategy has the chance to be effective, though, as Ippo undergoes arduous and repetitive training with no complaints. This is also the chapter where Morikawa establishes his favorite joke in the entire series, when Takamura shows everyone in the gym that Ippo's got a huge Mara. Takamura mentions to Ippo that he shouldn't complain about the showers too, noting that he won't be able to have any anytime soon, an early reference to his extreme weight loss requirement. The two visit Aoki at his ramen shop, another place that we'll get very familiar with as time goes on. Takamura talks about his upcoming diet, something we'll see firsthand throughout the rest of the series. Ippo, noting the level of self-sacrifice required for so many boxers, thinks to himself that they all must love the sport very much in order to endure it. Ippo returns to training and time flies as Chapter 8 ends with the conclusion of the 3-month period. After all of their hard work, both fighters are ready to enter into the ring for a sparring match which will greatly influence the rest of both of their careers. Chapter 9 kicks off with Mama Makanauchi giving Ippo a hilarious mental exercise to help him gain courage for the spar. After that, we get yet another main character introduction with boxing journalist Minoru Fuji, who goes on to head over to the Kamigawa gym in search of the talented rookie Ichiro Miyata. Fuji ends up getting invited to watch the spar, and the gong finally rings, giving our protagonists a chance to show what they've learned over the last 3 months. Ippo dashes out of the corner, implementing a suppressive attack aimed at keeping Miyata from having any time to throw punches. The strategy works as Ippo keeps Miyata on the back foot, throwing punch after punch, something that's only possible due to his prodigious stamina. Miyata aims a counter at Ippo, but he manages to dodge, something that really shocks Miyata. Ippo follows up his dodge with 2 punches, a left and a huge right straight, scoring his first ever down in all of boxing. The chapter ends with Miyata on the ground and the entire gym shocked, Ippo himself included. We see Miyata stand up on the count of 8 before assuring his dad that he took no real damage, another trait we'll see repeated time and time again throughout his professional career. Resuming the fight, Miyata dodges Ippo's repeated right straights before landing a big counter which knocks him down. Ippo stands back up, rushing down Miyata before landing another right. It's really interesting to compare their internal monologues here, as Miyata's thought process is consistently more complicated, while Ippo's is more pathological and obsessive, focusing on tinier, more immediate goals. As the fight continues, Miyata manages to time a right-on-right counter, which under normal circumstances should be enough to knock Ippo out. Unfortunately for him, Ippo's observation skills are on display again as he sees the punch coming and dashes into it, neutralizing the power. Ippo doesn't miss the opportunity as he lays into Miyata with a massive overhand right, sending him flying across the ring. The chapter then ends with Miyata getting up, showing us that his determination is on par with Ippo's, a complete unwillingness to lose. The two continue their duel into chapter 11, throwing a series of small and compact blows which narrowly miss until Miyata manages to land a right counter. The two fighters make their way back to their corners to the astonishment of the rest of the gym, who note that their skill is way above their ages. Kamigawa worries that Miyata's counter might have had psychological effects, but Ippo is proud that he landed any punch at all, showing the way that he tends to motivate himself. The next round begins with Ippo layering on pressure, spamming his high-speed jab to keep Miyata pinned. Fuji notices that the storyline here is almost too perfect, a match between gym mates starting a heated rivalry. In a really haunting panel, we see that Fuji suggests that we might be seeing a legendary fight which could never occur in the pro ring. Remember that for the future. Round 3 begins with Miyata changing his style, employing a hit-and-run strategy while savagely striking Ippo. At the end of the combination, Miyata unleashes a huge right straight which lands deep into Ippo's face, causing him to fall from the accumulated damage of the non-stop attacks. We see Ippo stand up at the start of chapter 12 in defiance of Miyata's appeal from the prior chapter. While his face is covered in blood, his eyes are still extremely focused and clear behind that. In the intermission between round 3 and 4, Miyata talks to his dad about the quality of Ippo's punches, specifically noting their destructive power. He looks to have a face of genuine appreciation, finding Ippo an enthralling rival and enjoying their battle and how far it's pushing him. Over in Ippo's corner, we see an early example of his mentality when he's perfectly focused, telling Kamigawa that his intent to win is simply spilling out due to the circumstances. We see Ippo employ Operation Turtle once again to survive Miyata's unrelenting rush, aiming for the moment where he stops to breathe. Having found that moment to dash in, Ippo switches to an incredibly compact right uppercut late in the motion, catching Miyata entirely off guard as his incredible reflexes kick in and he sways backwards. It looks like Ippo missed, as his insane follow-through slices through the air. With the punch being missed, his motion leaves him incredibly open, an opportunity Miyata won't miss. So just as Ippo thinks he's lost, we see Miyata fall through the air. The punch, the uppercut, actually tapped his jaw, and his legs are completely gone. Chapter 12 ends as we enter into the last chapter of the arc with Miyata confused at his shock down. Chapter 13 begins with things looking bad for Miyata, who can't force himself to stand up. Miyata gets pissed as Takamura completes the count, his body betraying his incredible ambition, refusing to cooperate and continue the fight. And for the first time in the series, but absolutely not the last time, we see Ippo look around, anticipating as the referee grabs his hand and the winner is Ippo! After all of his hard work, after all of the effort he put in, he has taken the first step of self-transformation. This journey started out with Ippo as a victim, completely unable to help himself at all, but through his interactions with boxing, and specifically his rivalry with Miyata, he's built up not only physical strength, but a whole new layer of self-esteem and confidence. After the fight, Fuji shows Kamigawa a picture showing the moment of impact on Miyata's chin. The journalist leaves the gym, remarking that Ippo is surely talented, and asking that they raise him to be a strong boxer. Toward the end of this chapter, we get a scene that goes on to have huge and lasting ramifications for the rest of the story. Ippo, having heard a rumor that Miyata was leaving the gym, goes to find him at his house. There, Miyata confirms that he's leaving the gym, but it's not out of embarrassment or anything that small, but rather because he wants to settle the match in the professional ring. Miyata says that they'll meet at the Rookie Kings tournament, and there they will settle things. It's this declaration that drives these two for an extremely long time, and it shows that they both have the same obsessive gene in them when it comes to boxing. The chapter and the arc end on a positive note as Ippo returns to the gym and begins his preparations for his professional debut. All in all, this is a wildly strong first arc, as we're introduced to a huge amount of important characters and are given exceptional characterization for all of them in a short amount of time. Ippo is a relatable protagonist, one who will go on to really justify his name being in the title. In the end, the major theme of this arc is self-transformation. Morikawa very clearly believes that dedication to a craft can yield extremely positive effects for the student, especially in boxing. Ippo's first encounter with the world of boxing is also his first encounter with maturing as an adult, and from here, we're going to watch him grow from this point forward, one step at a time.